Back out by Jamie Baker. Yushkevich wheels it back in. Lindros lost. Archibald takes him out of the play. Up with it is Recchi. Walks in front. Shot one, knocked down. Rebound, score! Lindros!
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. It is Isaiah with a full crew today. Yeah, it is the O&B Puckcast, episode number 168. The Flyers are at the quarter mark. They come in with a record of 7-8-4 as they enter a game versus the Capitals in D.C. on a 7-game losing streak. And we have a lot to discuss, a lot to hash through. We have a great guest. He's one of our favorites. And let's introduce the panel. He's always Mr. Steady. To my left, he is Chef B. How are you?
Very good, guys. Happy Turkey Day to all. And we'll see if we can not get a turkey on one of these Flyers games coming up. Maybe it'll do something, maybe even a whole overtime loss for the holiday.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. And he's been around the world, so to speak, a little bit. And we've really missed him. He is the great Dan Silver. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Glad to be back in the U.S. of A. And actually, I'll be at the Flyers-Caps game Wednesday night. I'll be at the next two Flyers games going on Friday with my parents. So I'll get an uphand close look at what's going on with them after kind of being MIA for the last few weeks.
Okay, we need the forensics on this one. So, put your Quincy hat on. But, so before we introduce our guest, just to remind everybody, O&B Puckcast is on 12 podcast platforms, including Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Deezer, Radio Public, you name it. We're on it. We have a Facebook page and a YouTube channel. Just plug in there, the O&B Puckcast. If you could subscribe, that would be great. It moves us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcast, and our listeners really have picked up, and we do truly appreciate it. If you could give us a 5-star rating, we will read the next one on the air. And if the Twitter rumors, which I don't necessarily believe are true, we have a backup account on Getter. It's a free speech platform. And I come from the days of the Pentagon Papers, the ACLU, and all that kind of stuff. So that's where I'm at. And other people are looking at other platforms. Hopefully we'll go nowhere. Of course, you can follow us on Twitter at O&B Puck. And without any further ado, from 97.3 ESPN in South Jersey, he is Kevin Durso. How are you, man?
I'm doing well, guys. Great to be back.
Yeah, it is great to have you. Just a note before we get rolling, I just want to thank the blog FeedSpot. It talked about the best Flyer podcast, and we made number 3. Okay, so it had 15 best, and we're humbled by that. We really appreciate it, and we're going to try hard to keep up the kind of quality that led us to that point. And speaking of lack of quality, the Flyers are on a 7-game losing streak, Kevin. And according to Anthony DeMarco from the fourthperiod.com, the Flyers had $35.66 million of players that were on the injured list, including Wade Allison, Cam Atkinson, Sean Couturier, Ryan Ellis, Scott Lawton, Travis Konechny, JVR. And they had a press release today about, what's the update and who's coming up and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, it's an absolute laundry list of, guys that are out there right now that are dealing with something. And, to get some updates was good, but obviously the news on all of them wasn't very good because they're going to be missing these guys for a little bit. Pretty much all of them at this point. I mean, Scott Lawton, it's approximately 2 weeks. He was placed on IR. They're calling it an upper body injury. I tend to believe that there wouldn't be a timetable if it was what I think everybody kind of feared at the beginning, which was maybe another concussion for him. So I don't think you'd be able to put a timetable on that. So I'm thinking more shoulder region probably. I mean, he took a pretty hard hit off the ice. It's kind of just a freak incident. Nonetheless, it's going to keep him out for a couple weeks. And as a result of that, they kind of snuck that one in there because they announced that separate from all of the others because there was a corresponding move with Lawton going on IR that Jackson Cates is going to come back up and probably be presumably in the lineup on Wednesday night as soon as Wednesday night because, I mean, they need bodies at this point. So that was the first part. And then this next release came out that had pretty much the rest. So Travis Konechny will be out 10 to 14 days. That's labeled as an upper body injury, but we kind of all saw the clip, probably the hand, wrist area, something like that. Wade Allison, that's going to be another 2 to 3 weeks. They actually did identify this injury, a hip pointer, oblique muscle strain. So they gave you a region to actually note where the injury was for that one. Cam Atkinson still out week to week. There's not really any identifier on it. It's labeled upper body. I tend to think that given his whole status for the year and the fact that he hasn't played yet, this feels like Ryan Ellis from a year ago where it prolongs with the week to week thing, and the idea of just classifying it as upper body to me means that it's a multi-layered injury also. It means that it's probably more than one thing or that you can't really pinpoint a specific area. So that's why you're getting that kind of vague description, but it's still not good considering he hasn't played yet. And you're looking at, week to week is going to put him out for the rest of November into December. I tend to think I'm not optimistic about the month of December at all. So start leaning towards maybe January, but who the hell knows at this point. And then you start getting into some guys or a handful of guys who you might be able to start. I think the first three all had timelines where you might see them relatively soon. I mean, you're talking at least 2 weeks for everybody, but at least that's on the shorter term of a lot of these injuries. James Van Riemsdyk had surgery on his left index finger on October 28th. That was a 6-week recovery. He's still on pace. He has been skating. So, the target date there is probably December 9th. The Flyers are in Vegas that night. So put a target on that. It could be a little after, but that's a target. Sean Couturier, status quo for him, had the surgery on October 27th, still 3 to 4 months from that date, and you're wait and see on that. And then Bobby Brink, who had off-season hip surgery in July, still on track, has been skating recently with the Phantoms. Timeline lends itself to maybe a late December, early January return, and I would imagine he'd start at the AHL and then work his way back up after missing this much time. But still, if he can get out and play some games somewhere around the end of December, early January, at least that gives him a shot to probably be one of these young players who gets a look by the end of the season. And I think that's got to be the guy who I think you absolutely, without question, want to see by the end of the year. I mean, if these other injuries or these other guys can, come back too early, if it turns out to be a prolonged thing, the handful of guys that are 2 to 3 week injuries are what they are, and they should be back relatively soon. But you know how these things have gone for this team in the last several years. They tend to linger, and you hope that they don't rush anybody back from anything that they're going through. But I'm not near as optimistic about guys like Couturier and Atkinson at this point. And if you kind of get to a point in the season where it doesn't feel worth it, I don't know that you even worry about them down the road. If it's, if it's late February and we're still talking about those guys, do you even bother with it based on where the season is? You want to look at a guy like Bobby Brink. You don't need, we all know what Sean Couturier is at this point, and certainly you want to see him sustain health, but I don't think they would risk anything for the remainder of the year if it got to a point where there's nothing to play for other than to see who's going to stick and who's not. So, but that's the list of the injury updates. And it seems, if it seemed like it took a while for me to get through that, it's because there was a lot of names to go over.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. It's just so comprehensive, Dan.
So yeah, I mean, what's interesting is, and I just realized I'll be in that Vegas game too, out in Vegas. So maybe I'll see the return of was it JVR or whoever you mentioned might be back then. But this team got off to a good start from the winning perspective. Obviously, a lot of it was Carter Hart's superior play. I'm wondering now, with all these injuries, in the offseason, we heard about Chuck Fletcher's aggressive retool. John Tortorella kind of walked that back a little bit in his first press conference. Now the team's lost 7 in a row. The injuries are mounting. It's still early in the season, but I'm sort of wondering when there's going to be, I guess, an overhanging sort of Tortorella and the Flyers management staff, the whole concept of, obviously we're not tanking. They're not going to actively tank. But as the injuries build up and as the losses continue, I find myself wondering if the decisions that the front office makes and maybe that John Tortorella kind of makes will be with an eye towards not being that upset if the Flyers end up with a top 3 or top 5 pick in the upcoming draft, since we know how good the draft is going to be this upcoming season. I'm sort of finding myself wondering that. And I don't know if Kevin or any of you guys kind of want to talk to that, but I feel like at some point that's going to become almost like a focus, and maybe will allow them to trade some of the guys who might have some value before they might ordinarily do it. And just, that's kind of what I'm going to be looking at now.
Well, I mean, this kind of intermingles a lot of topics that we wanted to talk about. I mean, at what point, at what juncture, and this goes right to Dan's point, do we say, let's not put a Band-Aid on this season, Kevin, and kind of accept where we're at, move out some guys, set ourselves up for a really good offseason. That might even include dipping into the free agent market to kind of kickstart whatever they're trying to do into the next era, but also while doing a lot of things that Torts is doing under the radar. He's kind of working with different groups of people, and there seem to be different strategies for different players as he goes through a weeding out process, and he's been very open about it.
Yeah, the problem with the injuries right now is it kind of serves as a kind of, like, you hate to say it, but it serves as an excuse for a lot of people, because, from John Tortorella's perspective, it makes it hard to evaluate a team. He said not long ago, got to get some guys back before I know exactly what it is, and that's, that's all well and good, but I think he's very well aware that guys aren't walking through the door anytime soon. I mean, as evidenced by all the updates today, they're not getting any of these guys back for the next, what's that going to be? I mean, over the course of 2 weeks, they're going to play at least 7 games, I think, because they've got a game every other day. So, he's not getting any of those guys back for, we're going to be pushing the halfway point before he's got some of these guys back possibly. So it does make it really hard to evaluate a team. You got some young players who are getting a lot of ice time, and, that's a benefit when you're trying to build a team for the future. And I think you have to remember at this stage of the game right now that, John Tortorella is not about the wins and the losses right now. I think a lot of people in this moment see the 7-game losing streak. They see the way things are going, and knowing Torts' reputation, are waiting for the explosion. They're waiting for that press conference where he just unleashes his wrath, kind of. But he's really not doing that, because I think he knows what this team is at the moment. I was talking to somebody about this pretty recently, and it kind of ties into what Dan was talking about, where at what point, and I even said, I kind of think that what he's realizing, because there's a lot of things he said where you kind of can tell he's kind of coming, and whether it's, I think this was in response to the in-game interview we had in the One Columbus game. That was, for anybody who didn't see it, if you aren't an ESPN Plus subscriber or Hulu subscriber, since it was one of those exclusive stream games, they had it in-game interview. They put the headset on Tortorella, and he talks to Brian Boucher, and Boucher asked him what he thought of the first period, and he just came out and flat out said, "We suck. We haven't done anything." And what, we're not forechecking. Well, what do you want to see? Forechecking. Okay, thanks. And that was the end of the interview. And I kind of laugh at it, because I sit there and go, I think he's realizing more than ever as the games go on, and especially when guys get taken out of the lineup, because this was before Konechny and before Lawton come out. And those are 2 guys I think he's had his eyes opened on a lot since the beginning of his tenure here, since he got the job, because, Lawton's the only guy who's been wearing a letter all season, and Konechny has been praised a lot lately as a guy who's kind of stepped up as a bit of a leader. Like all of a sudden in the last couple of weeks, it was like Travis Konechny's name was hardly mentioned in the discussion of who could be one of the leadership group members of this team. And then all of a sudden, the way Tortorella was talking, it was like, well, maybe that's a guy who's starting to earn a place in like the candidacy for that in Tortorella's eyes. And I think that with guys like that coming out, Tortorella seeing just how little, how little the talent pool is in this organization right now and realizing what they have. And as such, I'm starting to wonder if at some point in time that's not going to come to a head when they have meetings and it's in between. He's trying to coach a team. He's trying to have guys, and basically his attitude is we're trying to find out who's with us and who's not. Who's going to be with us in the long run and beyond this year and whatever this year is, because he's not focused on, what are the words that he's not saying and things like that, or that he's quickly dismissing. We're not talking wins and losses. We're not talking playoffs. I'm not making predictions. It's create an identity. That's the whole goal to John Tortorella, is create an identity. And this is about finding out who's in this, who's buying in, who's going to stick with this thing. But it's something when you don't talent level that other teams have. I think that a coach like Tortorella is about voicing his opinion, obviously. And I think it's going to, at some point in time, you wonder, is it going to come to a head with management and whose side is everybody going to be on? Because this is about the time we've seen this before. This is about the time of year. This is the type of situation where things change, where changes are tend to happen in an organization. I can tell you one change that isn't happening. It's not going to happen to John Tortorella 3 months in from getting hired to coaching a really strong first month by the record. And then what this past month has been, it's not going to happen to him. So at what point in time does something come up where maybe Tortorella just says, I don't know what's going on upstairs or in the front office and what's happening with your meetings, but this is not working and I need more. And if you're not going to get me what I need, and if you're not going to be doing stuff to improve this team and this franchise going forward, then at what point in time does that open the eyes of higher ups beyond that and lead to a change? That's where I'm thinking, because I know everybody wants to hear that this is, Chuck Fletcher's seat is burning up and burst into flames and that it's coming soon. And I just don't get that sense right this second, because I think that right now they're leaning on the injury thing. But I do think that if you want to influence the change, or you want to see that change come, I think that one of the areas where it could come is if John Tortorella gets fed up with the whole situation and they kind of if he's at war with the front office, that he's going to win right now. I think that he's going to win because right now what he's trying to do, they've lost 7 games in a row, and yet they've been pretty competitive at 5-on-5 in all of them. I mean, you can pinpoint their lack of success in these games to special teams, to the opportunity, to not having skill players that can score. They don't have finish ability. They don't have that, definitely don't have that ability in overtime. So that's where you can attribute a lot of it to. Most of their actual analytics, especially at 5-on-5, have gotten better over the course of this stretch after winning 7 of their first 12 games. So that's where it's really hard to pinpoint. So that's where I think that you might see something happen, is if they start to go at it, and what voice is going to prevail in that. I think it would be Tortorella's over Chuck Fletcher's at this point, because I think right now they stand by Tortorella more at this point.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree at all, because I think, Tortorella, if he's done anything, we don't even talk about Gritty anymore. I mean, he's the star of the show right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when they lose, his press conference afterwards is a must see, and the honesty, and you could see he's just bonding with this fan base. And a lot of people get the sense, Chef, that it's like, get this guy some talent and something good could happen. And why is there a lack of talent? And like Kevin seems to be kind of implying, I mean, it's going to sharpen the focus on Chuck Fletcher. And there's going to be a point at which, and I agree with Kevin, that there's going to be somewhat of maybe a conflict, or maybe a deep self-reflection with the organization about maybe some changes that have to happen.
So here's my take, and I know I'm a little out there sometimes, a little off center of what everybody else thinks. I think this is exactly where they wanted to be. I think that as they go through this, they're establishing what will be the new core. They're in a position, and if anybody thought they were going to be better than what they really were, they were delusional. I think me and you were talking about that a little bit before we started here.
there is nothing about this team that says now hard work and all that will get you everywhere. But, Rudy's a fairy tale. The Rudy story is a fairy tale because it can't sustain itself. Eventually, skill is going to catch up, and it does, and it catches up with them in the games. You can't play at that pace and maintain that discipline before you get frustrated. Somebody's going to get frustrated, take a bad penalty, and then you get paid. You get made to pay for it. Earlier in the season, they were making other teams pay for their mistakes. Now they're paying for theirs. So I don't think this is necessarily the worst thing. You're cutting your players down. They're staying competitive. They're playing pretty good. Obviously, they're giving up. Of course, your coach is going to go all out. He's going to pull his players twice and give up 2 empty net goals last night. But it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. He's telling these guys, look, I'm putting it all out there for you to try to win a game. You need to put it all out there too. And that's what he's getting. To his credit, he's getting that back. So you're basically finding out who's got the merit, who's got the moxie, or what you will, and the team mindset to make the cut so that when they free up all these money in trades or next year or guys are out of here and you can actually start his rebuild, he knows he's got the pick of the litter. He knows who he wants. And I think that you're looking up and down this lineup, he might pick 4 or 5 guys because you're going to need something to obviously to keep your cap down. And if they can prove that they're going to work and they're going to be productive long term, then I think that's what he's looking at right now. And then on the bonuses, you put yourself in that position for that top 5 pick that you hopefully can get.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of survival at this point, and guys get back into the lineup, picking that, that fork in the road, which way they're going to choose in terms of trying to, like I said earlier, in terms of what level of talent they think they can get in this year. They need to get by or let the kids play and let the chips fall where they may. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chef that it's all about Tortorella kind of trying to figure out what his core would be moving forward. The problem is when you say the pick of the litter, well, the problem is the litter is not very good. So, okay, yeah, so Tortorella decides that he wants to keep around whoever. Well, obviously, Travis Konechny, let's say, okay, he wants to keep around Noah Cates, Owen Tippett. He wants to get rid of Morgan Frost. He wants to, get rid of, I don't know, Rasmus Ristolainen. The problem is that the pick of the litter is not very good, right? And so for Flyers fans who are trying to figure out, okay, what is the path to this team becoming relevant and a perennial playoff contender again, it's just a very hard path to see. And you sit back and you kind of wish, man, I wish they traded away Rasmus Ristolainen for a first-round pick last year at the deadline. Or, hey, even maybe wish they'd had the foresight to, instead of extending Sean Couturier to an 8-year contract, maybe when he was on that contract making $4.3 million, maybe you move him and try and, get some first-round picks for that. Not saying that there were that many people advocating for that at the time, but it's a possibility. And that's why a GM gets paid what a GM gets paid, so that he can kind of navigate through the future and make some moves that might not be popular, but that might be the ones that will help the team out the most down the road and become a Stanley Cup contender. We're finally seeing the fruits of the New Jersey Devils missing the playoffs 9 out of 10 seasons. They got lucky in the lottery a few times, but they've won, 10 or 11 straight games. They've got Luke Hughes, who's one of the top prospects in hockey, is going to be on the way soon for them. They'll look like a really dangerous team for years to come. So the problem with the Flyers is that they don't even have a second-round pick in this year's draft. They just have the 1 first-round pick. Hopefully, they get a top 5 pick. But it would just be nice if they had a little more draft capital so that they could – maybe get a few blue chip prospects coming out of this year's draft, because 2021 draft, they literally got no good prospects. They traded away their first round pick for Ristolainen. Their second round pick has literally been one of the worst players out of the entire draft. So far, Tuamala has been horrible. So they're basically, that draft is like a nothing for them. And we'll see how Cutter Gauthier develops. He's been pretty good so far in college, but but they just need, they need to figure out a way to get talent like that. And it's very hard to get through free agency. So that's just, my concern is that, yeah, Torts will figure out who he wants to keep around, but they're going to need to augment that with a lot.
That's just it. I mean, and by the way, the New Jersey Devils are up to 13 games in a row. So, and they're, I've never been knocked out by their goaltending. I thought Blackwood would be better than he has been, but regardless of that, I mean, when you have that level of player, a Jack Hughes, who is now ascending and getting into that top 30 in the entire league, he's sure looking like more and more like a Bergeron clone and a really useful player. And they always played with pace. They're an exciting team. And that's kind of what the Flyers need to become. And the question becomes, Kevin, as you watch them, will the Flyers make the moves they kind of make where Chuck Fletcher finally stops with this kind of relying on what happened in 20, which is really a mirage, as we see now, and do something to set them up to become the kind of team that we're seeing right now in New Jersey and some other places?
To be honest, I don't know if he can do it, because that's the biggest question to me as you move forward. That like this isn't about what's on the ice at this given moment. The team is what it is. We all can see it. The talent gap is massive most nights. And to be honest, like I said, it's remarkable that they actually during the losing streak are playing better analytically than they were in the time when they were actually, winning some games and getting fortunate. I mean, they're putting out, I'm calling it a preseason lineup because it's what it looks like. I mean, you got guys who are playing on second lines that don't belong above the third at any point, and usually only belong on the third because of injuries. Like that's how injured you are. But that's why the bigger question is management, because you're going to hit that interesting crossroads again where, and that's why I say, like, right now, I know people are going to see what the record is. They see the losing streak and really think that the only logical thing to do right now is fire Chuck Fletcher, get him out of here. Why is he still here? And, I don't necessarily disagree that this should happen at this point. I mean, I think it's long overdue anyway. I think it should have happened a year ago when you made the coaching change with Alain Vigneault. That's when it probably should have happened more than anything, because if you weren't going to fire him then, like they didn't, then you knew you were going to let him handle the trade deadline. And so you let him handle that trade deadline. When you got to the end of the season, if you weren't going to make the change then, you were going to let him handle free agency. Like everybody who was getting really kind of frustrated and angry and at the end of, everything when free agency kind of passed them by and they did nothing. And we've talked about that at length before. Kind of one of the things you kind of just have to shrug your shoulders though, kind of, and go, well, what are you going to do now about it? Like free agency's over. He did nothing. You're going to fire him now? He's already created the team that they were going to have for this year. That's him. That's his responsibility. He oversaw all of that. So, if you weren't going to fire him at that point in time, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what it would do today, because you have to ask yourself, what's the next move if you do that? Are you just giving the reins to Danny Briere right now? Or, because I would assume that if he goes, then Brent Flair would go. So are you giving the reins to Danny Briere? Or are you going to talk to one of these senior guys and say, hey, serve as the interim until the end of the year when we can do a real search? I don't know that that's the right idea either. Like, you want one of those guys running your trade deadline this time? I don't think so. So that's really the question, because, go back over the course of the deadline last year and the start of this year and the free agency period and all that type of stuff. If you want him handling that, I look at the recent track record. I wouldn't want Chuck Fletcher handling the deadline this year or anything beyond it, because, I think we can all kind of, look, hindsight's 2020. So in the moment, the Ryan Ellis trade or Sean Couturier's extension or even Joel Farabee's extension were pretty relatively universally praised for what they were at the time, because it was like, hey, the money kind of checks out, the years check out, the ability checks out, or the need checked out. And now we're looking at what they are. Couturier hasn't played much at all in the last, hasn't played at all in over a year, or is going to have that. It's going to cross over a year by the time he steps on the ice again. Ellis hasn't played more than 4 games in a Flyers uniform. And Farabee right now, you can tell he's coming back from this injury, from this surgery that hasn't really been done that frequently for a hockey player. And is showing signs of needing to kind of work his way back from that. So maybe he returns to form. I mean, look, if Jack Eichel this year is any indication of what can happen maybe a year down the line from that surgery, there's a positive outlook, but you don't know that. But for all of those decisions, after everything went off the rails last year, there was no reason to re-sign Rasmus Ristolainen and commit for 5 years. There was no reason to commit $5 million to Tony DeAngelo and trade 3 draft picks away. There was no reason to lock yourself into 4 years of Nick Delorier. And, as much as, maybe this is the player who I think people could get on board with, there's no reason to give Travis Sanheim a massive contract extension at the beginning of the year either, because you continue to make decisions that trap yourself from doing anything that gets you moving forward. So that, those guys may be playing, they're not on the injured list, but you can still see the talent disparity. So is that what you want to prolong by having this guy in charge? That's the big question. So, if beyond this season, if you can get, if he handles the trade deadline, there's not a Claude Giroux to trade this year. The biggest guy they have that's making the most money is James Van Riemsdyk, and then you got a bunch of one-year deals that maybe you look to move. I think the Ristolainen thing is fascinating because I don't get the sense that he's towards his favorite player, and they're on year 1 of a 5-year extension. What do you do in that case when the coach doesn't seem to like the guy that much, but the GM gave him 5 years last season? That baffles me. And how they get out of that, I don't know, because I think every team in the league's just going to look and say, yeah, you're stuck with that one, guys. Have fun. So, if you allow him to be the GM beyond the season and make these decisions and continue to alter your future, then I think it's a complete admission from the ownership group that they're content. And if they're content, that's a complete slap in the face to the fan base that continues to somehow or other show support for the team, despite the fact that they continue to make the same mistakes and prolong this path back to relevance.
Yeah, it's really hard to argue with anything. And the flexibility is the one thing the Flyers need most at this particular juncture, and it's the one thing that Chuck Fletcher has robbed them of. And what do you do to get out of this fix? This is almost like a replay of when Homer left Hextall with so much to do with Nick Grossman and Chris Pronger's contract. And it's like, well, history repeats itself. The first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. And it seems farcical. It was some of the moves that have been made. And Chef, here we go. So what is there to look forward to is a question, Chef. I want to pose to you in terms of players or something that you're looking forward to for the rest of the way. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the Flyers on the ice. It could be Cutter Gauthier at BC. It could be Denoyer looking like another kind of Noah Cates kind of player, just off the top of your head, because you're the true voice of the fan of among the 4 of us.
Okay, so if I had something to look forward to, yes, I look forward to – there are ways to get out of this mess. I've been playing with the numbers on paper myself and just fiddling around going, yes. And I think I said it last week. I said, look forward to the fact that given the next 2 years in the cap, at least Ristolainen, his contract is movable at least. It'll not look as bad as it does now because the salary cap going up. That's a movable contract. I think that's a movable contract this year, but that's just me. We'll see if that helps. Maybe there's guys out there looking for possible Toronto. Didn't somebody go down in Toronto? So there's a chance, albeit an outlying chance, but I can see the moves, when players like with heavy salaries like Ristolainen and JVR, there's going to, I have to look at it and know that when you make these decisions at the end of the year, they got to be for the best of the team. If you don't think you're getting Ellis back and you just tell them you got to do we can't turmoil in limbo. I think you got Fletcher getting fired in February. I think you have that looking forward to. I'm going to say that's going to happen in February. They can't, like Kevin said, they can't go into another trade deadline with this current GM. I think regards to younger players, I think Noah Cates, something to look forward to. I think Wade Allison he looked like 100% better and he was really turning it on before he got hurt. But that's it. if he can't stay healthy. And then you got some players that you don't know yet, but at least Gutierrez looks like he's going to be worth something. He's playing well now, and I actually think he'll probably be with the Phantoms by the end of their season, because I get the feeling the way he's churning, and I know by what he said before the start of the season, he probably wants to be pro by the end of his first year, right? So I think he'll possibly go sign as a Phantom. But they're maxed out on contract. They got to make room. So there's stuff that has to be done, but I'm looking forward to change, and I think there's going to be a lot of it by the trade deadline and by the end of the year.
Okay, so Dan, one of the things that's changed as the Flyers metrics, as Kevin was saying earlier, the Flyers are actually doing better, like their so-called process. Let's put it that way. If you look at expected goal, you look at Corsi, it has had an uptick. But you know what's changed is the nirvana of 945 Carter Hart is no longer with us. Now it's down to normal, really good 920. And frankly, he hasn't really been as sharp lately. And that little margin of error has really fed into, in a lot of cases, their 7-game losing streak. And it shows you between that and the injuries, they have no margin for error at all.
No, yeah. I mean, they don't have a margin for error because they can't score goals. There's so many players that are injured. Konechny was really one of the only guys who was a consistent goal scorer for this team. They don't have anyone who can score goals. It's a problem. The margin for error, like you said, is extremely slim, and the schedule, their schedule's pretty tough coming up. What's fascinating to me is, seeing which guys are sinking, which guys are swimming. I mean, Morgan Frost, it's hard to imagine that he would have much of a better opportunity than he's having right now to make an impact at the NHL level. He had a healthy offseason. He didn't last offseason. This season, he had a healthy offseason. He's now playing on a top 2 line, surrounded by, Tippett and Farabee in the last game. And he's a guy who I've backed up and supported over the years because I just believe in his skill set, but it doesn't look like he is an assertive enough or aggressive enough player to be able to get to that skill set in the NHL, because he just doesn't have the puck that often. He doesn't look confident when he does have the puck. So I'm interested to see what happens with him, because you look at guys that might have some value to trade, and he is one of the guys who I could see another NHL team taking a shot on. Maybe you get a 2nd-round pick for him or something. But that's one of the interesting things that I think, and I don't know if it was Chef or Kevin mentioned, that at some point here, Torts is going to be making decisions on the guys that are going to be part of this moving forward and the guys that aren't. And there will be some of those guys that aren't going to be part of it that might be able to bring some value in. So that's going to be interesting. The Ristolainen thing is interesting too, because I'm in between Kevin and Chef on this one. I think it's going to be hard to move him with that contract. But I think there will be some NHL GMs out there who feel like Chuck did, that he's, a big physical defenseman who has got some skill and might take a shot on him with that contract. I don't think you're going to get a 1st-round pick for him. I don't know if you get a 2nd-round pick, but if they decide they want to move him. But that's interesting because clearly Torts is not a huge fan of his. And I really wish that Tortorella had sort of had more input than he did on the past offseason, as opposed to just sort of letting Chuck do what Chuck was going to do. But there will be money. There will be money, because assuming that Ellis never plays again, Couturier, I'm concerned about long-term. He may be on long-term IR for a while. So this team is going to have some money in the offseason. I just, again, don't know how you're going to use it. They're going to have to get really creative, and I guess we'll see what happens. But, right now with the injuries, they have negative margin. The game tomorrow night's going to be interesting with the Caps, because the Caps are really struggling right now too. And the Caps are one of the teams that arguably has been worse than the Flyers this season. So that I'm kind of interested to see what happens there.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Flyers have 9 games, I believe, in 17 days. And you think of December 9th, I guess in December 10th, by the time they get done on a Saturday. What the heck are the Flyers going to look like at that point? Okay, let's take a little perverse pleasure here. I mean, if we're kind of like into the Bedard thing, let's just go there just for a little bit. It's a little fun. I just nobody's back from injury by that point. Really, I mean, just maybe the Vegas game we were talking about, maybe JVR could be back conceivably, but I mean, listen to who they play. Okay, so they go to the Caps. The Caps aren't playing well, but it's in Washington. Then they have a back-to-back. They're at home on Friday the 25th versus the Penguins, and then they have to go on the island on Saturday night. Then they get a couple of days off, and they play the Islanders back at the Wells Fargo Center, and that's the start of a 5-game home scheme. So then two nights later, they have to play Tampa Bay.
Brutal.
2 nights later, December 3rd, they play the Red Hot Devils. Even if they lost a couple games, I mean, it's a high-flying team, the kind of team the Flyers have always struggled against. And then 2 nights later, on Monday the 5th, they play the Stanley Cup champion Colorado Avalanche. And then 2 nights later, again at the Wells Fargo Center, they wrap up the homestand versus the Capitals. And then they have to go out to Vegas on the 9th. And there's your 9 games. And I'll tell you, Kevin, that little stretch right there could bring a tremendous amount of clarity to the questions that we have right now that seem to have this kind of nebulous haze around them. Maybe that could be the answer we're looking for: time, games played, and the results that we probably expect.
It's going to give you a clearer answer to whether or not they're firmly in the Bedard sweepstakes. I'll tell you that much because, it was funny. For the first couple weeks of the season when they were winning games, process aside, they were winning games. And most of the sports scene in Philadelphia was focused on other areas at the time. The Phillies were in the World Series, all that type of stuff. It wasn't at the forefront. So I did a spot on the radio station on before the Tuesday game against St. Louis and they won that game to go to 7-3-2. And I got asked before the game, explain how the team is 6-3-2, because for people who haven't paid any attention while watching the World Series and all that type of stuff. And I gave the answer we all know, which is it's a lot of it's Carter Hart. He's playing with astronomical numbers. It's, he's playing out of this world. Great. But I even said, how like the difference between being where they are, like if in 2 weeks, which we were just about 2 weeks shy of this point and Thanksgiving and all that stuff, if in 2 weeks they're still playing like this and the wins are still coming and all that type of stuff, then we may have no choice but to start to admit, like we are with the New Jersey Devils, it's all sustainable. It's working. They found a formula that works, on whether it's the coach, whether it's whatever. But it's just as easy to turn into what the St. Louis Blues were that night, what Columbus was that week, what Ottawa was that week. It's just as easy to put together 3, 4, 5 games in a row where you lose and the discussion goes the other way. And sure enough, they played their best game of the season that night to win, and then the losing streak started. And the funny part was I even said on the air that night that the numbers a year ago, they had the same record through 11 games. They were on track to possibly have the same record through 14, which would have been 8-4-2 potentially. And after 8-4-2 last season, that's when the first 10-game losing streak started. So you can almost match the timelines exactly, that they get through the first maybe 12 to 14. Things are looking okay. You don't love the process. Is it sustainable? And then it falls off a cliff. And it happened that way. And now they are 7 points ahead of last place in the league standings. And if Washington finds a way to win the game tomorrow night, they pass them. And you got a bunch of teams not that far behind. There's 3 teams that are at 15 points. The San Jose is also at 17, just like Washington is, while the Flyers are sitting at 18. Arizona and Buffalo are at 14. Like, this thing could shoot even further downward in a hurry. And, I don't find a single easy team in that grouping that you mentioned. Washington's probably the most ripe for the taking given their struggles. Somebody's going to have to win tomorrow, and it's 2 teams on losing streaks. But the thing that kind of is the deciding factor for me in those games against Washington is this team struggles on the penalty kill, and the team they're playing, despite all the injuries that they have, still has Alex Ovechkin. And that, to me, might be the determining factor of who has the edge in that game, because the Flyers don't have a goal scorer like that, obviously. I mean, most teams don't have an Ovechkin, but they don't even have anything close to that. Like, they don't even have anything in the second tier of that. And I just see that being the determining factor. So to me, I looked at the same exact number of games that you guys are in that sense and went straight through to the Vegas game. And yeah, I think you pull up just short of that Arizona game where you're like, all right, that's where the next window of opportunity may be, because every other team they're playing is better than they are. And in most cases by a wide margin.
You know what's going to help them in the whole Bedard, and it's not just Bedard. I mean, Adam Fantilli, who's a freshman at Michigan this year, looks unbelievable. And Michkov, even though there's some questions with Russia, I mean, he looks unbelievable too. There's also a number of other very good players. I mean, you look at the top 6 or 7 guys for the draft coming up in 2023, and you could argue that all of them would have gone number 1 last year. So this is an extremely deep draft, but those top 3 guys are sensational. And some of the other, there's some guys playing in Finland and Sweden who I mean, this has the potential to be a very, very good draft. What's going to help the Flyers out is that a lot of the West Coast teams are not very good. And so those teams are going to beat up on each other. So you've got a scenario where you look out in the Western Conference, and Anaheim is in last place right now in the league. Arizona's not very good. They
worry me. Yeah.
Vancouver's not very good. San Jose's not very good. But those teams, and Chicago's not very good, those teams are going to have to play each other. And so I think the fact that the worst teams, let's say the bottom 5 in the West, are worse than the bottom 5 in the East is going to advantage the Flyers, because the Flyers have got to play the East Coast teams a lot more, the Eastern Conference teams a lot more, and those teams have a decided advantage against the Flyers. Whereas when the Sharks play the Ducks, it's a toss-up. When Arizona's been okay this year. When they play one of those teams, it's a toss-up. So I find it extremely likely at this point that the Flyers are going to be one of the worst 5 teams in the league at the end of the year. And that gives them a decent percentage shot to get Bedard. You know, even if they're not the worst team or the second worst team, as long as they're in that 3 through 5 spot, they'll have a chance to move up to number 1, number 2, or number 3.
Well, and to that point too, I mean, like, you know, a perfect example of what Dan's talking about. It's not a complete alignment with just Western Conference teams, but last night San Jose played Ottawa. That's 2 teams behind you. Somebody's got to win the game. Somebody's getting 2 points. Flyers losing regulation. There's a gap. Another thing for me that stands out about this is we're still early enough in the year. They haven't played Anaheim yet, and they got 2 games against Anaheim. And they haven't played Buffalo yet, and they haven't played Arizona yet, and they haven't played Chicago yet. Like, there's a bunch of teams behind them that they're going to meet at least twice this year, and that's going to be points up for grabs. And if you lose those games too, you're going to just continue. That's how they pass you, realistically. I mean, that's what you're starting to look for. So, to me, you know, I remember getting comments on Twitter like really early in the season. They went 3-0 to start the year, beat Tampa, and the question, like the comments I was getting was, well, what's this all worth? There goes Bedard, there goes Fantilli, all that type of stuff. It was 3 games into the season, and that was where I kind of like was ready to lose it a little bit, because I'm like, you know, there's 79 more games left, right? Like, that's a lot of time to make up 6 points. Like, the worst team in the league can make up 6 points on you with 79 games to go. That's not impossible. Yeah. So, you know, that's why I don't freak out about the 7-point thing here, like the 7-point gap to Anaheim yet either, because you still have 2 head-to-heads against Anaheim. That's 4 points possibly right there. So you're not looking for much beyond that. I mean, that doesn't mean the Flyers are going to lose out either. I mean, they're obviously, but that's, you get where I'm going with that. There's still a lot of window for opportunity for those teams to play each other and those teams to play the Flyers too.
You know what the thing is, though, is that because this draft class is so especially talented and powerful, is that as we get further into the season, the teams that see that they may really have a shot to be one of the worst 3 teams in the league, they're going to start trying to tank. They're going to start, not the actual players, but the front office, they're going to start making moves. If Anaheim is still out of it in a month and a half, and they're like, man, we could have Trevor Zegras, you know, and Fantilli or Bedard, like, these teams are going to start doing that. And so that's that was sort of why my question about what is the Flyers front office going to do? Like, I think that they're going to need to start thinking about it and trying to move a guy like Aristolainen, or, try and make it so that, we continue to have a shot at one of those top 3 picks, because other franchises are going to do it. Chicago, basically geared their whole offseason around trying to be bad this year. They traded away Kirby Dach. They traded away DeBrincat. But they're not as bad as their front office probably was hoping. But you got to be sure that they're going to be doing things during the season for it too. So there's going to be some active tanking going on in the front offices, and hopefully the Flyers will do it too.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of teams we're talking about right now have lost several games in a row. I mean, just Chicago, as an example, has lost 4 in a row. Anaheim's lost 3 in a row. The Flyers have lost 7 in a row. Arizona's lost 4 in a row. So it's kind of like the reverse standings are actually more interesting than the top of the standings for the first time in a long time. Chef, you had something to say?
Dan had mentioned Anaheim. Is that, I mean, I think they're well under the cap. I think they got plenty of room. Is that like if you said that would be a reasonable place to try to send Ristolainen to? I think he would fit in there. I think that's a somewhat decent fit for him. Plus, if you're looking to get a pick back, they do have 3 second-round picks this year. I mean, if you can get one of them out of it and maybe throw a Morgan Frost in there, I think you might be able to pry something away with that. I mean, they're going to need room on the schedule, on the roster, and they're going to need to move more than just money, because they got to make room for contracts if they're going to do this stuff. Because if they do get one of these generational players, they're going to need room on the roster more sooner than later than I think for these teams. What do you think, Dan?
I mean, but my point is, like, if Anaheim continues to struggle, like, they're not going to want to pick up guys like Ristolainen who are going to make them better for this season, right? Like,
but that would be a contender pickup. That's where Ristolainen has appeal. And you mentioned Toronto earlier, Chef. And that, I don't know if that's a location, but if they are in position and they believe Risto can stop plays on their blue line as opposed to what he had been doing with the Flyers, there could be something there. But like Kevin alluded to, the value, the first round draft pick that would have been available at the trade deadline last year is probably, with that contract and the way he's played, not going to be available this year. And it just speaks to Fletcher tying them up and costing them the kind of flexibility they need right now at this critical juncture, when they can make these decisions, usher guys out, and do what Dan is talking about, and start kind of playing the game, losing some talent, getting future assets, but also kind of hitting the scoreboard with some L's when they need to. I mean, it is kind of a tank. It's a managed decline of a franchise in a season, is maybe a different way to put it, Kevin.
Yeah, and and to Dan's point about, like, teams that are going to get to, another month or so and then decide, we're not in the race for anything else, let's just shoot for the bottom of the standings kind of thing. That's where my take on Atkinson and Couturier comes from. If you don't have clarity on certain guys by a certain point, then I think that's what the Flyers would do to control their own destiny in that race too. You're not bringing back a guy like Sean Couturier who could actually provide some offense when you're not actively trying to necessarily, make your team better at that point. I don't think it would be worth it to, if you can go out and get a Bedard type player in that draft, is it worth it to bring Couturier back and risk his health going into next year when you're hoping to get something, as much as you can out of that contract? So, like, that's kind of where I'm at with that. And, certainly there's teams down there that are, we expected to be down there. Like, I don't think anybody's going, wondering what's going to happen with Chicago or Arizona. That was always to be expected. I can't wrap my head around the fact that the 2 bottom teams in the standings are Anaheim and Ottawa when expectations seem to be higher. Right. Certainly for Ottawa. I had Ottawa in the playoffs this year. That's how good I thought their offseason was last year. And certainly, they've lost, they lost Josh Norris for long term, and Shabbat's been in and out with injury. So I get it. That hurts. But and Anaheim's got a big blue line injury as well, because Drysdale went down as well for long term too. But it's funny that Anaheim's where they are because, I certainly had higher expectations for them. Last time we did a show together, I was headed to California 2 days later and went to their season opener and was a fun hockey game. It's a fun hockey team, I think. And yet they're, for all the skill that they have, it's not amounting to anything that they want it to be just yet. So, but you can imagine, I mean, Dan alluded to it. Can you imagine putting Bedard or Fantilli with what they've already got?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an embarrassment of riches. Well, and McTavish is a hell of a player too. I don't think he gets talked about enough in the group because I think everybody really focuses in on Zegras and Terry, but McTavish is going to be one of those guys that everybody's talking about too. And I mean, the same goes for Ottawa. Can you imagine if Ottawa stays down here for the whole duration of the year, and that's who ends up getting one of those picks? I mean, to throw on top of all the guys that they just picked up, to play a Bedard or a Fantilli with DeBrincat, like. Can you imagine the next few years of that team? Like, it should amount to something incredible for them. But that's why the Flyers need to be in this discussion, because at some point in time, every team's got to start somewhere with this type of thing, and they kind of need a gimmick right now. And I don't mean a gimmick like the gritty stuff and all that type of stuff. They need a player who looks like he was pulled out of a video game. And I don't know if I can go a day in between, 24 hours after Bedard plays a game that I don't see a clip of something that he did. So, and Fantilli is right up there with them. And we've gone through the list already. And the draft, from my understanding, from talking to a few people about it, the draft list, it may be even more than what was alluded to about, 7-8 guys at the top. I mean, I've heard it's as deep as, the first 10 to 12 are, and maybe even beyond that, are legit. Like, this is going to be that kind of draft. If you miss the playoffs, you're probably coming away with a good player. That's kind of what I'm understanding. But there's a lot of work to be done in between, because you got to make way more work than just getting one guy. I think right now, it's kind of, I don't necessarily disagree with what Chef said at the beginning. I don't think that they're disappointed that this is where they are, because Tortorella had zero expectations on wins and losses, and the team's actively, without doing it in any form of actual tanking, they're putting themselves in the position everybody wanted them to be in. So, freak injuries or bad luck or whatever you want to call it, the team also lacks the talent. They need to contend at this level, and that's why they are where they are. And it's only going to continue to go downhill before it gets any better.
Yeah, that's where it's at. It's just suffering through the process. We're only a quarter of the way through the season, and we're trying to find nuggets here. I mean, Tanner Luzinski gets his first goal the other night versus Calgary. It came out. They weren't really happening until Farabee gets a really nice goal intercepting a pass. And, go through some of these games and you can pull out little nuggets in areas where things are really going well, or at least there's an instance of a player breaking through. Like Frost looks really good in the game versus Montreal, and he looks every bit as bad when they play Calgary. And this is the kind of thing what Dan was referring to in terms of Frost and players like that. When does the light go on, and does he need a change? And do the Flyers need a change to move on and get a different player that the other franchise is disappointed? It may be like an Owen Tippett situation where Tippett is now emerging. He had some chances with the Panthers, and maybe he just needed to be a little bit out of the spotlight and mature physically and whatever to get it going. And this is the process. So this is the Philadelphia Flyers for you. We're waiting for Ty Foster and Denoyer and obviously Cutter Gauthier. Kevin, just an aside with Kevin Gauthier, and then I want to hit one other major thing before we call it at night. From what I hear, the plan is kind of one and done, but the done doesn't necessarily mean that he'll be a Flyer next year. He'll try to compete. In other words, if he has the kind of college season they believe he has, that is capable of, that he would be a pro next year. And I just want to run that by you. What have you heard from the Flyers' perspective, or maybe even the players' perspective?
I know that that's his plan, because he said that from the beginning, and he's reiterated that since, and all that type of stuff. Like his plan is, this is his year to do it. I mean, it very much falls in line with the same path that Joel Farabee took at BU, where it was a freshman year, had a really good year, and he turned pro right away. And it wasn't really long after. I mean, he didn't start the year with the Flyers the following year, but what they get into 7 or 8 games, and he was up. Like, it was quick, and he was up for part of the year, went back down, came back up, and they really haven't been able to look back ever since, whether it was because of health purposes, he's playing and other guys can't, or, just the fact that he did take the opportunity and put together a few good seasons to be what I think, at least. I can't see him going anywhere anytime soon, because I think that you can see it's a little slow this year because of what he had done in the offseason, or done last season. But I think that he's going to continue to get better as he gets fully healthy and comes back from that surgery. I think it will work wonders for him. But you definitely can't help but see what Gauthier offers at least at the college level so far. I mean, he's got 6 goals in 8 games, which is pretty darn impressive. And some of them have looked really impressive too. I mean, like, he's done some things that you can't deny it. It would be a welcome sight on the Flyers, because he's got some skill. It's not like he definitely doesn't have the lack of skill that some of these other guys have. He's got finishing ability. So you hope that that's something that translates down the line, but I don't know if it's going to be as early as next year. I kind of always thought he was 2 years away. So if he plays his freshman year at BU, I think he needs a minor league season. But that's me. I don't know about, I think that the team is kind of on that level right now as well. But I'm not sure about, where he is. I just know he wants to turn pro. I don't know if he's, he kind of alluded to it'll be what it'll be. He's just going to go and focus on what he controls, which is his level of play. So that's the best way for him to look at it. And I think he's a guy to look forward to, because the other thing that I would certainly hope happens in the near future for him, and we're talking maybe another month or so, is when World Juniors roll around. I certainly hope that he's part of it, because then that would be another great place to see what he looks like, especially as a draft +1 year for him now, because he was pretty solid in World Juniors last year. He had in the 6 games played, he had 3 goals, 9 points. So he was solid. He definitely opened some eyes there, and that's why he went as high as he did in the draft. But I would hope that would continue. Like, I hope that he's a guy who takes even another step at World Juniors this year and shows that what he's doing at the college level so far as a freshman, and what he was able to do leading into as part of the development program and all that type of stuff. I hope that goes and translates to World Juniors for him. But so far, so good. I mean, I did see something about how for one game they tried him on left wing and then shifted him right back to center. So I really hope that development path stays firm, because this team is incredibly thin at center. More so than the other forward positions. They're thin everywhere, kind of, but they're really thin at center. And I think that's where his best, that's where they could really utilize him. And, to be honest, maybe that's where, his quickest path to the NHL is by being a center, because right now, if things keep going the way they're going, I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, they'd have to move a contract somehow to make this happen, because they're at max contracts. They're at the 50 maximum. So they'd have to move a contract. But I wouldn't be shocked if at some point in the near future that a guy like Artem Anisimov, who's on a PTO with the Phantoms, gets a call and it's like, we need you, just because we need a body. It doesn't even matter the ability level. So as thin as they are at center, I certainly hope that Gauthier stays at center and follows that path, because I do think it might be his quickest way to the NHL.
Yeah, and that's, as someone who's followed the Flyers as long as I have, that traditionally they were always strong down the middle. If they didn't draft it well, they go out and get a Joel Otto or a Michael Handzus, and they always had somebody, even at that third line level. And then it's, I guess, after the group from 2012, kind of that whole thing receded. They traded Braden Shen because they didn't really think he could be a center. It's kind of going backwards ever since, and they really haven't drafted very well, and with guys like Rubtsov and not really making it. And so, yeah, it's definitely an area of concern, and hopefully he can do something. But I would like to discuss, before we go, one more topic that concerns one of the great centers in Flyers history. And it really, I'm referencing Chris Therrien's great new book. Everybody should pick it up, called Road to Redemption. And it just chronicles Chris's career, his personal situation, his battle with alcoholism, and it recounts some of the great days of his career, and which overlapped Eric Lindros' career. And Dan, I wanted to make sure I could get your input. There has been, in my opinion, a little bit of revisionist history about what happened when Kevin I should say when Eric Lindros was here. I was going to call on you, Kevin, but in terms of how it went down, what it was like from the fan perspective, what Bob Clark didn't do well, what the Lindros camp, including Eric and his parents, didn't do well. And I just really felt like when Chris Therien hit this subject hard, and I think it was the name of the chapter, and please, Chris, forgive me if I forget, it's Behind the 88 Ball or something like that, and talked about some of the positive attributes of Eric, and also some of the problems with the dynamics in the locker room and how things played out in the year season, the 2000 season. It was so disappointing. In my opinion, he really calls it the way I remember it. Now, I was in my 30s at the time. I wish I was in my 30s again. But the thing was that the problem is that Eric Lindros, Dan, kept kind of playing the same way. And maybe if he realized, I'm not going to run over these 25 and 35-year-old men the way I was running over these 17-year-olds, that he might have been able to adapt his game a little bit more choosy, kind of like we want with Wade Allison, with the kind of physicality that he engaged in. He might have been able to achieve his goals and had lengthened his career.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Lindros was basically invincible for the early parts of his hockey career, and I'm including juniors. I mean, he would just go out there and he would run people over. He was a bull in a china shop, and no one could. He was a superhero. He was invincible. He was that much bigger and stronger than anyone out there, and so that's how he played. I mean, he played with reckless abandon because he felt like he could never be injured. And then the Darius Kasparaitis hit happened. He was concussed, and he just sort of never adapted the way that he was playing after that hit. And the same thing happened, obviously, with the Scott Stevens hit. Now, 2000 was probably the most upsetting fan moment for me. That was the year that they lost in the conference finals to the Devils, right, Isaiah?
Right. They were up 3-1, and yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so yeah. Well, we could never beat the Devils. We make it to the conference finals. Lindros is out. We're down 1-0 in that series against the Devils, and then we miraculously win 3 games in a row. And we lose game 5, and then Lindros decides that he's coming back in game 6. And for me, if Lindros had not come back, and Keith Jones actually wrote this in his biography, in his autobiography, was that he also believes that if Lindros had not come back that year, that the Flyers would have gone to the Cup, and I think they probably would have beaten Dallas. But Lindros came back, and what happened was that all of the players then, instead of playing as a team, they basically said, 88's back, Eric Lindros is back, he's going to lead us to the Cup. And in game 6, what happened was Lindros was far and away the best Flyers player on the ice. He scored the only goal for the Flyers, but no one else really came to play like they had been for the entire playoffs leading up to that. And so they lost, I think, 2-1 or 3-1 that game. And then they come back home for game 7, and it's a tight game. And then the hit happens with Scott Stevens. And that's the quietest that I've ever heard an arena in my entire life. I was at that game, and it just, when that hit happened and Lindros is writhing on the ice, you could have heard someone whispering from across the rink. It was surreal. And Lindros was, he's never the same player after he came back from that. So yeah, I mean, he was watching him in the early parts of his career with the Flyers, winning MVP. I mean, it was some of the best memories as a Flyers fan I've ever had, but also some of the most bittersweet moments. And who knows what really happened with the locker room, but it's clear that his parents probably were a little bit too close to the situation and got involved where they shouldn't have gotten involved. And Lindros was still a pretty young kid, so it impacted him. It probably impacted some of the ways that his teammates felt about him. There's probably a lot of good stories behind the scenes that happened during those years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't say enough about how much I enjoyed. And I've just only skimmed a couple of the chapters. Bundy has a style that kind of, like, in his own way, is so unvarnished and so refreshing to read. You just can't stop reading it. I'm going to just check out this little chapter, that chapter. You can read the book like that, but of course, there's some serious messages there that involve mental health and alcoholism and all that. And there's just a lot there for a Flyers fan, and also on a personal level, even if you're not a hockey fan. Kevin, I know you're a little bit younger than us, but you know about Eric Lindros, and obviously you've done your research about these things.
Well, I pretty much grew up with him because of the fact that my first real exposure to Flyers hockey, let's face it, Eric Lindros' rookie year was the year I was born. So, I'm showing my age there, I guess, but nonetheless, but when they finally were making runs, when it got to 97, 98, I mean, I'm 5 years old watching this team, and it felt like, I latched onto a different player on his line. I latched onto John LeClair as my guy, but the more that I think about that era of Flyers hockey, and the more that I go back and either, YouTube is chock full of highlights from that time frame, and the more I appreciate Eric Lindros' playing career, especially before all of the hard hits and things like that. I think that, it's for a lot of people who are my age, it's probably the reason why they got into Flyers hockey. That was the guy, and he came in at a time not too different from right now, when the team needed something that kind of got everybody hyped up about it. And here comes this 19-year-old kid who shows up, and the entire hockey world, because of his junior career, the entire hockey world was focused in on him. He was getting tabbed as, he was the 90s version of Sidney Crosby to an extent, because people were calling him that very thing. They were calling him the next one. He was going to be the guy who took the torch from Gretzky and Messier and guys like that. And when they made it to the Stanley Cup final and beat the Rangers in 97, that's the type of stuff that was being highlighted when they're on those broadcasts. When I'm watching clips of that stuff, they're showing the handshakes, and you're seeing what looks like a passing of the torch. It's here's Gretzky and Messier saying, "Okay, it's your turn, kid. Go get him." And it just never amounted to that. So that's the shame of it. I'm really happy to see, he's really involved with the Hall of Fame weekend stuff. He just played in the Hall of Fame game. He's the captain of one of the teams. It's kind of nice to hear and see that he's got a quality of life back, that, after all of that type of stuff. And I know he's really Eric Lindros is really dedicated to the concussion research type stuff. Sure. And all of that, which is a great thing, because it helps advance the game and protect players. And kind of to tie it into everything that you guys have been talking about with Chris Therien as well, because first of all, obviously, I know Chris Therien as the player first, but then also, the years he was broadcasting for the team, we all know him from Snow the Goalie now too, and all that type of stuff. And he's great for breaking down stuff within the game and things like that. But I think what he's doing, especially with this book, and he's talked about it in other segments as well, not just within the book, in other avenues, it's a topic that I think everybody can relate to. I have a friend who's gone through something like that, who's, battled those kind of demons and things like that, and come out on the other side, and the way you have to support people like that, and, just the way that, that there needs to be more known about that, because we all should kind of keep looking out for each other with things like that. So I think what I haven't had a chance to really dive into anything with the book or anything like that, mid-season kind of stuff. And there's been a lot going on personally for me as well. So, at some point though, I hope that I do get a chance to take a good look at it and see some of these stories, not just from the playing side of things, but what he's doing to help people too, because he's always offered that if anybody needs to be talked to about it and just, get educated on the way to approach these types of things and the way to avoid this kind of, that path and all that type of stuff, then, he's an advocate for it. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Chef, why don't you wrap this segment up and before we close out?
I look back on that, and he really, I mean, you couldn't tear me. There's times when you take off games or you DVR them or stuff like that, but that time period you didn't, because you never knew what he was going to do, to whether it be the Crazy Eights line, which, or the Legion of Doom or whatever it was, you didn't know. And I look back and I get a little nostalgic, and I get a little upset too, because I think, man, if somebody would have just took him when he was like ending his juniors and starting the NHL and said, hey, why don't we try this? But it's hard to, because we all know what we were when we were 18 to 20 years old. We were headstrong. We why fix it if it ain't broke kind of mentality. And I just think if somebody could have maybe if there was a little give and take there, if he could have gotten a little guidance, it wouldn't have taken much to change up his style to make it safer and more effective. I think he could have been even more incredible, and that's the crying shame about it. But you play with the cards you're dealt, and I'm glad that it was Chris that he's sitting there, and he it's good. It's always cool to see the opposing views of stuff of people who were there. So that was the interesting thing about it, and he's a great guy, and we could all learn from Chris on all about being kind and generous to other people, and he does that on a regular basis, and God bless him for that.
Yeah, well, being no BS on top of it. It's a tough combination to put together, and I think Chris Therien deserves a lot of credit for being able to do that. And with that, Flyers play tomorrow in DC versus the Capitals. We'll see what happens with the Phantom/Flyers. Kev, I want to thank you so much for coming on board. If you want to have any final statements, or you're promoting anything, where can people find you on social? You just let us know here.
No crazy final statements. I'll just tell you where everybody can find me. So the usual, 97.3ESPN.com, sportstalkphilly.com, the YWT podcast, which, by the way, when you guys brought up that list of the blog of the podcasts that you guys were number 3 on, we were number 12. So nice to be included in that top 15.
Right.
So, and we've kind of had some unique scheduling going on. So we really kind of have done this bi-weekly record thing. We're back to weekly as of this past week. So we're going to do another show on Sunday this week. So those are the places where you can find me. Twitter, it's at Kevin_Durso. I kind of threw out there the other day, just given the state of affairs going on. That's also my Instagram handle, if in case I have to pivot for coverage. I'm possibly going to have to utilize that too, even though that's not a usual form of publicizing most of that type of stuff for me. But nonetheless, but there you go. It's been great being on again, guys. Always appreciate the time and the ability to talk with you guys, because it's a lot of fun. And it was kind of fun to throw a little something else, some nostalgia into the end too, because those were some of the first players I remember.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, a lot of fun. Thanks again, Kev. Dan?
Yeah, fans can find me at dsilver88. And like I said, I'm looking forward to seeing some hockey. I'll be at the Caps-Flyers game tomorrow night in DC, then the Flyers-Penguins game, and then, I'll be out in Vegas for a couple weeks in December, and I'm going to go to that Flyers Golden Knights game. The last game I was out in Vegas, the Flyers actually beat the Golden Knights, and I think it was the year that the Knights went to the finals, or maybe the year after, but it was a huge upset. So who knows? Maybe it'll happen again.
Yeah. All right, looking for that. And did you say you gave your Twitter at dsilver88?
At dsilver88.
Fantastic, Chef.
You can find me at Chef to Left B. That's Chef, the number 2 to Left B, and I will interact as long as if you want to argue a little bit or whatever. I know my unique takes on things are a little bit different, but I stand by them.
Oh, nothing wrong with that. And of course, you can find me at Isaiah, ISAIAH _520. Isaiah, don't forget the underscore 520. And of course, the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck on Twitter and Getter, if that's the backup plan at O&B Puckcast, all letters at O&B Puckcast. We'll see what happens there. So we're looking forward to these next 9 games in 17 days, but we'll catch you before then. So everybody have a great Thanksgiving. All you guys, hope you have a great time with your family or whoever you're with for this Thanksgiving. It's a special holiday. It's one of my favorites. So until next time, everybody, take care.